hectic bit of work to arrange it all. Welcome to another Mish, or in this case Mix and Mash Battle Lounge with the 2MK team.
The time has arrived. Come.
It is, of course, another Win 10 Battle Lounge matches week. And we always suggest that during that time you spend some time trying to get stronger opponents who will beat you up for 10 rounds until they get their fight money. Sometimes you can stand up to them, sometimes you can't, but either way you're likely to learn quite a lot. And that will, of course, be our target for the day. It also helps us with our bot work because it does give us a lot more information about whether or not there are entirely new strategies that the bot is missing, or whether or not you can at least stand up to high-level players without needing to know more than the bot, and his mindsets and skills of certain types that you need. Our Guildbot is mostly about understanding when to whiff punish and the space to stand out to make this whiff punish work, with some understanding of the zoning. But we do often run into the problem where it strains our players quite a bit, as, I mean, how else are you going to do certain things? You have to be able to think through strategies in much faster timing than a player that's likely to repeat it. A high-level player will not give you enough time in general to think your way through the strategy. While we do often evolve this as, hey, your analyst is helping, it doesn't always work well enough because I end up talking about things that don't keep happening. Given that Gil is a relatively punishable character, he can be dealt with a bit more often by expecting him to stay quiet and so on. So we can at least do the psychological aspect of this, although it's definitely going to be difficult for our Kanzuki because this is relatively far from her general play, even if she definitely wants to have this style. Gil as a character does have some weaknesses in terms of how well he can keep someone out without hitting buttons.
Round one.
And you can use this in a lot of situations. But you don't generally want him to get too close to you. So I would say that our probable likely high difficulty here is that, as we discussed last week, our Karin usually likes to, oh, you're close to me and you hit buttons, therefore I should hit buttons. Which doesn't work on Gil for so many reasons. Repositioning isn't necessarily what you want to do either. Technically the only real answer is to not let Gil get this near to you, but we've discussed before the idea of your opponent thinking it is your turn still. There's no specific reason though why this will be something that they'll consider. But there we have that moment of, oh, I have a chance, I must finish them. And obviously it doesn't work. This person is Diamond. They have been through that enough and are expecting it. So, this is mostly going to be, can our Karin calm down? Because it's not very hard to stop Gil from doing damage to you if you are calm enough, because he doesn't do anything. He's not a character where you have to care what Gil is doing in neutral, other than zoning. And Karin gets to ignore half of that, so why does she even care? From the psychological perspective, therefore, this is pretty easy. If you can get yourself to not stress too much. Gil's dash up stuff isn't that great even. He'll often dash up and just do things you can block. And when he does throw you, it's not one of the biggest throws to worry about. Especially if you manage to keep him mid-screen by not getting into trouble up until then. He doesn't actually have the greatest corner push game because he does have to use moves that tend to not do very well at him. And using too much pushback leads to that situation where you have either the fireball is coming or he's punishable because he shouldn't throw the fireball there. You can therefore see why V-reversaling Gil off you in the corner is so helpful. Because Karine is so capable of dealing with this zoning, if you're not super stressed,
Time to return to harmony.
but that's exactly what we are looking for today. That is what is supposed to happen, to have the punctuation as heavily as possible of don't do that. And they don't get much more heavily punctuated than that move. Since it is mix and match, we may be drifting around today in terms of team members as usual.
Let's do this.
It's a little bit unclear when that will be. But we'll definitely get around to someone else at some point. But let's see how this works out the other way.
Round one.
Since Ryu's style of fighting this character is about the same, honestly, he just has longer range. And obviously a fireball, but you don't even really want to use Ryu's fireball that much against Gil. There are just too many situations where it can go wrong for you. What Ryu has is the option to parry at extreme close range, partially because Gil just somehow feels like he's telegraphing his fireball more than other characters. It could be animation, it could be something to do with the timing of his declaration of the move. But I'm fairly confident that you can parry Gil's projectiles a little more easily than other characters. At closer ranges, that is. It might be the speed of them as well, because since Gil's heavier projectiles go up, he probably doesn't quite have the faster one other than Pyrokinesis itself. What this really allows for a character like Ryu is that you could trust that the max range of Gil's normals isn't going to bother you, or that they're slow enough to be similar enough to the projectile, that if you are in a block string, crouching, medium punch, crouching, medium punch, just parry at the end, a little bit delayed. Especially if you have enough health. Because Gil is definitely one of those characters that you think about the match in terms of phases. Is Gil powered up enough yet? Does he have his V-trigger available to end you from one mistake? Or is he still early in the match where his damage is actually relatively low? And you can take a risk or two to see if you can either convince your opponent to do something different or not. As a Gil player, you therefore have to kind of ignore the things your opponent does in the beginning of the rounds that you don't actually mean that, you're just doing that because I can't kill you yet. Or, technically, psychologically speaking, you should do the same thing, especially if you're close to having V-trigger somehow. Because this will outright help you if you keep doing the same thing until your opponent thinks that, oh, this is the way for them to win, while staying mostly even. You can easily just go with, okay, now I have meter and you're just going to die. Kind of like this. This was not the more spectacular of Gil combos, but they get up there. but the overall flow is the same. You can see spaces here where Gil is in a mind state of already defensive. There's nothing you're going to get done here. A Gil player that knows their ranges will stand there and be the impassable wall of boss characterness that he is, and you won't do much of anything. Learning to deal with this sort of wall character is definitely one of the harder things in fighting games. Most of us have to do it through Guile, but Guile isn't as flexible as Gil when it comes to that, and you can get used to Guile's movements a little bit easier. Though you can't necessarily say that Guile doesn't have that one mistake into death deletion thing, because he does have it now. It is very helpful, however, that Gil's pressure on your wake up has light moves in it.
Time to return to harmony. Seraphic wing! You must accept your fate.
Gil wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Unfortunately, it is true that unless you make a specific attempt, a lot of effort, to make sure to know and apply the correct mindset for a matchup before you go into a fight with the bot, you're just not going to be able to do it on demand.
The time has arrived. Come.
In other words, if you're fighting Dhalsim bot, we're still working on new Dhalsim bot. Looking pretty good so far. You must remember that the Dhalsim match itself is about making Dhalsim stressed while you remain calm. You can't use the bot with the mindset of, okay, let me learn some things about Dhalsim's normals, because you're still going to play wrong. And then
That is the truth.
an actual Dhalsim will see through this. So, here we have the same problem. If you put a bot of Gil in front of Kansuki Dynasty, she has an idea of what to press, an idea of what Gil can do. But as soon as you have to face a player, the situation's a little different. And because the bot doesn't do pressure, getting under the stress will not solve the problem in any way. For an example of what I mean by mindsets, if you have a character that is almost certain to lose to you in neutral, but can do massive damage if you mess up your meaties, don't do meaties. Unless you're confident for some reason, just don't go in when you knock them down. You're already winning. Technically, going in when you knock down is literally letting them win, because you were winning before without them taking any damage off wake up at all. This is usually the first thing I remind Kansuki Dynasty of when in these situations. It affects Omni Rabbit as well. In fact, most people who play have the same problem. When the opponent is knocked down and you know you're facing someone strong, they're like, oh, I should go in and I should hit buttons and I should pressure. But players who play Gil are defensively minded to begin with. Why bother doing that? Just let them lose in mid-screen. See? That is usually enough to anchor a player until the next crazy thing happens and the opponent makes some adaptation based on it. But fortunately, Gil doesn't have a whole ton of good adaptations for this. He dash ups and throws a bit more. Like that. So we're going to see a lot of that, but the thing about this is one doesn't have to care about Gil's dash up throws. In fact, you could spend your time instead thinking about how do I beat dash up throw, which is a different bot, therefore a little bit harder to deal with, but it's still there. And there you have those weird whiff punishes. You're supposed to learn those weird whiff punishes from the bot as often as you can. The thing that has happened here though is that the situation has changed enough for our Kanzuki to have options for when to use her EX uppercut, as opposed to trying to just find random times in neutral for it. Oh, wrong move.
You lose.
Which presumably means that more bot practice is needed, because the bot has a specific thing about teaching you to cut that move short. You can hit Gil out of the startup of that and it will prevent the ice from happening. Therefore, it is not actually a tool that Gil can use at that range in neutral.
Fight.
But that normally causes the same thing I'm talking about. There's a flip in the mindset that goes, okay, I made a mistake and lost, I haven't trained enough or something, and then you end up not fighting properly. So I'm expecting to see a lot less actual strong play from Kanzuki Dynasty for a little bit while her mind readjusts to, okay, no, I didn't completely mess this up. And usually that's something that happens in tournaments a lot. You do really well, you feel like you're doing decently, your opponent does something that makes you feel as if you really don't know what you're doing, and then you kind of drop your entire mindset. You have to learn to stay at this state really well. And you know how we are, we walk forward, other people walk backward, it does not matter. So far in our experience what level of play the other people reach. We as a team just walk people to the corner regardless of their numbers. The only time this doesn't happen is in tournaments, and we mean like combo breaker level tournaments, because those people are used to other players of this specific type, whereas you don't meet a lot of players with this specific idea of things mid-level. People who will just go, you know what, no, I'm just going to walk you down because I know that you don't have whatever it takes to attack me. Your offense might be good, but it relies on something and I can negate that thing. You can also see here that Gil doesn't normally rely on his crouching medium kick in normal play because it doesn't give any pressure. If he happens to get it blocked, it's worse for him. So you can therefore walk away from this character a little more often than you can most. Aw, flinch. There are 4 solutions to that situation, but again, there's too many things going on. After the V reversal, you could probably, Gil has no invincible reversal, he has no, you could just super because he'll die. But that is again a matter of, oh wait, I'm relaxed enough to recognize I have just done a V reversal, the situation is completely in my control now. What is my situation? Do I have a win condition from here? How do I do this? Keeping up with that aspect of Street Fighter and any fighting game is what actually takes you past, in this case, silver. And that is why we don't have bots that are specifically meant to improve you to the point where you can win in gold. We have different ways of using the same bots, but a lot of that is simply up to you. Mentally, you have to gain more skills. Interestingly, you can gain a lot of those skills from our Dragon Ball FighterZ bots if you happen to own that game. Because Dragon Ball FighterZ bots push on you incredibly heavily to recognize situations and to watch meter really, really heavily. The game itself is of course also more simplistic, so you get to practice that part of it without having to think about, okay, which move is this? How plus is it? I don't know any Dragon Ball frame data, and honestly when you watch people play at high level, you would wonder why it's even necessary. You need to know enough frame data to think, okay, that is, this character has no advantage there, but then they just don't ever hit the button. Why would they do that? Unlike this game where you have to work on opening people up by doing specific things with your own character, Dragon Ball allows for assists, other setups, things that are closer to anime style instant air dash shenanigans, stuff like that. Therefore, if you own that game, the bot's easier to input. It's technically only one bot. Feel free to try to input it if you find that your problems have more to do with meter watching, accuracy, keeping up with things, because you can definitely use that to train here. After playing Dragon Ball FighterZ for a while, especially against like whichever bot it is that has Broly and Piccolo in it. I've forgotten what we called that one. I think it was accuracy. I'll check. Street Fighter just feels like entirely being in slow motion. This doesn't mean that you make their decisions any better, but it means that you have enough awareness to know that you need to make them. Air Intercept is Defense Series number 2. So it's a suggested reading / playing for people who are working on keeping themselves mindful enough to actually get certain things done. The thing to understand about Gil is that Gil's defenses are functionally perfect in one way, and it comes up a lot in fighting games. A character will put you at a space where their defense becomes perfect. And this is absolutely possible. The games are designed for this to be possible. They not only allow it, the Street Fighter's design heavily encourages it for defensive characters. They have pushback and similar ideas that put you at a space where their defense becomes perfect. Which is why when you see them make changes to Guile and similar things, there are always these strange little silly pushbacky style changes. And you think, how is this supposed to help? But that doesn't change anything. Guile does it. Oh, but it does. If you change Sonic Boom's pushback, you have changed the flow of Guile's movement and spacing such that he no longer has perfect defensive spacing after a certain string. And that means that he must either not use the string, use a more unsafe one in the same place, or retreat. Which is one of the things you'll notice happen if you have like a lot of experience with this game. The last time they nerfed Guile and got that Sonic Boom change after Capcom Cup 2018, I believe it was. It might have been 17, I don't pay attention to when exactly they changed things, unfortunately. I'd have to reference it through lots. But Guile got these relatively minor seeming changes, and all of the high-level Guile players went, oh well, this sucks. Guile is now B tier. And if you don't understand the game, you're definitely looking at like, so they changed pushback on Sonic Boom and like 1 frame point. How? But that comes up a lot, so you can actually learn to watch for that. It's one of those things that when you know it's possible, it's really important to actually look for it and learn it heavily for characters. You don't have to learn it by studying frame data. In fact, technically the frame data doesn't tell you anything because you don't know the pushback.
Time to return to harmony.
Those are things that are in fact learned by experience and by just testing out your own stuff, which of course means losing. But we do attempt to put in the perfect string, the perfect defense string, into every bot. Every bot that has one, you can be assured that I spent a lot of time in trying to make sure that the string is in it. Unfortunately, I usually can't make sure that the string is common. But I do try even that for more defensive characters. So, watch for those things. Not Guilebot. Guilebot is... Guile's own is really complicated, so... I think I can eventually make a Guilebot that does it, but... His more so relies on the fact that there's a certain space where the player can't do 2 things at once, but one of them is... Basically, anything you can do is either reactable, or... Guile got to keep going and you probably didn't hit a button. I don't know how to explain that well. Probably I'll try to do a stream on it at some point, maybe on a Friday. This is content that normally needs a lot of expanding because it's not the sort of thing you can just demonstrate while people are fighting. I'm taking the opportunity today because we have this Diamond Guild to help us out. Thank you to them. So, to understand this, for example,
Show you the divide in our cliques.
Gil does have a lot of holes in his offense, but you saw at some point that Gil can get to a spot where he's just using the fireball and hitting a different button. So there is a pyrokinesis, let's call it a loop. You will be tempted to counterattack here. You cannot counterattack here. And here we go, the corner one.
I shall persevere. Go forth. The curtain falls on ice.
This has a solution. In fact, it's a relatively easy one. You forward jump the same way you forward jump against Atkins. But you have to know when in the string to forward jump.
This ice shall be your doom.
And you can only learn that by trying it and remembering what happened before you forward jump, which requires a mindset. You have to commit to, okay, I'm definitely just going to hold up forward here at a specific time, and instead of caring whether or not I get out, I'm going to watch my opponent to see what they were doing, and if I get hit, I'll know that that string that I just saw isn't one that I can forward jump out of. But doing all of that is relatively hard, because you're playing the game, you're not thinking in the sense of, okay, well, I should be doing this analysis and figuring out this thing and so on.
The curtain falls right there. Right there. Right there. Right there. Right there.
This one you can practice against the bot. It's actually relatively easy. You get used to the fact that the animation for this move is very, very reactable, and Gil can't do anything for a really long time. Also, the ice takes so long to fall that if you have a way to cross the screen, as Kareem does, you can just react to that move as a generality. The stance change you will eventually learn to react to overall. I'm not sure if this player is helping out in terms of showing it, but maybe they are.
Go forth.
You even see him like pull back his hand a little bit. And the main important thing to remember, always, is that when your opponent has got no other options in neutral, you can just prime yourself for that one thing. It's not necessary to think about anything else. There's one forward jump. But presumably, after image or me saying the words or any number of things that one must work on for those reasons.
This ice shall be your doom. Round two. Fight. Go forth.
So that move is much more reactable than you would initially think. In fact, you can see that Kazuki Dynasty lets this basically play out almost entirely before she reacts at this time, which means, again, more Gilbot practice. It's harder to get him to do that just mid-screen for the bot, but it's not, like, impossible altogether. While situations like this often feel impossible, this is what bots are for. To speed you up to the point where your opponent does not have to finish the entire animation of a move before you are reacting to its existence. But again, the more important thing is to become as calm as possible, which is our Kareem's struggle. This is hard because your experience tells you I have to care about other things happening in this matchup at this time. But there isn't a reason to care about anything else. Well, it looks like that's over and our demo has therefore ended. Usually, we therefore leave this lounge to go seeking our other team members. Let's see how they're doing and whether or not they have found anything interesting. So let's drop in on the wolf. We may not actually end up playing this one. The connection is not the greatest for the situation as far as I can tell. But hopefully theirs is good and it just will be weird to us. Normally I give a whole spiel about it being Atlantic Rim and so on, but for mix and match this is less necessary.
It ain't too late to run off to mum now. Round 1. Fight!
Well, I don't know how this feels to them, but the information certainly isn't reaching us very quickly. Our Birdie Bot, as far as I know, does not prepare you at all for his second B skill, but it does prepare you for that. In fact, it does that, what you just saw, a lot.
Round 2.
That said, you can only be so prepared. Okay, reports for me are that this is good on their end, so presumably we just won't be having Kansuki Dynasty fight. Hopefully it won't cause the group to leave. If we just hang out, but we'll see. As is common with bots, the idea is that you should do them in relative order. In fact, we have the tendency to literally run the gauntlet for practice some days, start at Kenbot and go all the way through. Probably not Necalli bot, because chances are your Necalli bot is not the same if you are an avid bot user. But if you're not, and you only have a first couple of bots in the first place or something, sure, try Necalli bot too. You can skip over whoever you need to that day in order to get your training in. And this is why it was always important to actually count the points, because part of the reason you're counting the points is to recognize, can I actually do this well enough to say I can advance past it? In fact, commonly we do it as rounds and have to do it twice. If you have trouble counting the points, then I wouldn't necessarily suggest you spend a lot of time doing it, but do understand that part of the reason for this is specifically that forcing yourself to count them is building the mindfulness required to get through a lot of situations. You can train yourself to physically do something, but your opponent will definitely find tricks and cause you other problems, and when you get up to higher levels where you can mostly do the thing, you'll find yourself in situations where you need more than just, okay, I can do this reaction. Because your opponent will find ways around you doing it, or more importantly, take advantage of the fact that you're primed to do it. Counting is therefore a good way to occupy your mind enough to unprime yourself at least a little bit, to test whether or not you can do this reaction even when your mind is sort of somewhere else. If you focus in so hard on the thing in question that you are losing count, you're focused too hard. And you should generally see if you can do it without actually losing your track of your count. And of course, for recognizing multiple different related situations. For example, you could be really good at doing point systems B when you're focused primarily on point system B. You could also be so conditioned to do C that you do C even while you're focused on B and counting.
Birdie wins.
But you don't count C, which means you're not necessarily recognizing when C is happening, and that might be your win condition for the match against a particular type of player. There are absolutely situations and players who will do the same thing over and over again, especially if you don't tend to punish them heavily for it. Birdie is a perfect example of this. Because the punish you use against a lot of Birdie stuff doesn't really do that much damage. Let's check for other lounge users, and if not, we'll go back to duel. We do have less people around today, group-wise. So we're probably just going to end it back there. It might be harder to find if you are not in silver or bronze or low gold yourself, due to the similarly standing being generally the best way, and if not the only way, to find the group, since we tend to leave our lounges open for so long. And even if we didn't, it would eventually come up. So remember that in your searches, but it looks like we've only really got one today, and the Birdie had it out anyway. So we're going to head back out as well. And start looking for another to shift on, now that our Karine has had a moment to rest, let's say. Sure, why not?
It's go time. Let's do this.
We do definitely have at least a good enough connection here. Sometimes it's weird and drops entirely to nearly nothing. Sometimes it reports it's good and still lags. These two have a lot more off-stream matches than you would expect from any knowledge of our timings. Or rather, a lot more off-stream matches than on-stream or online matches. But it's another situation where Kazuki Dynasty's patience matters a lot. Understanding the overall mindset of your opponent does help you get through this, because it helps you stay calmer enough to be patient, and it helps you recognize more quickly when you've done an impatient thing that mattered a lot. But it's not necessarily going to help here as heavily as certain other things could, both because it's Mika, and because Justvine's style of play does not necessarily leave the type of openings that come up. What often is more likely to happen is that Kazuki Dynasty will get away with a lot more things, specifically because she has enough time to think about, she's calm enough to think about, how do I get through this and quote-unquote trick you enough that your punish or your counter to my situation doesn't actually lead to you getting damage, it leads to me getting something. The skill of frustration players. Oh, I've done this a couple of times and you didn't punish me, or you punished me in a particular way. I know the way to get through that situation and still do a ton of damage, so I'll do that. Just Fine is of average susceptibility to this sort of thing, but she cares a lot less. Just the, okay, yeah, I got hit by your shenanigans. You're out of meter or you're out of something else and I don't care anymore, so I'm just going to ignore the fact that this happened. That, for example, that might phase another player thinking, well, that I keep on getting beat up, why is this happening, why am I not? No, Just Fine will probably just wait her way through all of this, and any amount of health loss is just, yeah, okay. Because she has her own. Not quite enough in this case. I wasn't sure because it was Karin. But you definitely can see that this pushes Kanzuki Dynasty more and more toward shenanigans, sudden moves, meter usage, and so on, which eventually means she'll wear down. More importantly, as she wears down, the calm required to actually do this is likely to flutter out. For example here, the V trigger is going to help a little bit, but it will help definitely less than other characters because Mika does not care about your parry if she plans to punish you with throw. Meaning you have to be a lot more careful, especially in any situation where you could be punished by throw to begin with. Familiar opponents are the sort of people you can target their psychological weaknesses a lot better. But sometimes that's what you need, someone to push on them for you.
Round one. Fight.
Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily work that well because it causes associations with, I am fighting this person, therefore I can be calm, or I am fighting this character, therefore I can be calmer. You can try resolving it, but one good way to do it if you have a large enough group, especially if you're playing like semi-offlines and some of you are at like someone else's apartment or house and some are not, is to simply have someone else play the character and not tell you. However, it's a little disingenuous, so your better option is often to find a different player of the same character, particularly a frustrating or a good one that someone can say is, okay, this is not like me, this person, this player is unlike me, so you should fight them. There's that neutral jump, long range, yes, wingless counter. She's been, well, in this case it wasn't even ES, it wasn't necessary. Which just shows you how hard she's been training that. That is in fact one of the things Dhalsim Bot helps with. Even though Dhalsim does not strictly speak a neutral jump, there's definitely some related things. A good example of why the Mayoken will probably keep on hitting is because it's basically free to do. It gives Karin meter, it helps with certain things, there's no real way around that, you just have to deal with it. At the range they fight at, the only thing Mika could do is expect it and parry. Fortunately, this actually does kind of work because the specific situation leads to things being good. For Mika, that is. Karin does have ways to punish Mika for doing the parry, but she can't crush counter from the same max range Mayoken's spacing, and if she was thinking about Mayoken, it's unlikely that she was going to walk up and crush counter. Walking up is the thing that becomes the problem. Similarly, failing the timing on the parry and getting hit by the Mayoken is exactly the same as getting hit by the Mayoken any other way. So it counts as one of those things that, while risky, strictly speaking, isn't necessarily that terrible. There's a lot of moves in the game that are risky only when you do them toward the end of the match where you have low health, or your opponent has a potentially large confirm, or similar, but not risky at all otherwise.
Round one. Fight!
Alright then, my turn for a little bit. While Rillian is taking a break. That was, basically exactly how she described it for me. In that over time, my, like, stress or reactions, things built up, and I had a little more trouble with my grounding. Sort of as a result of that. It's definitely clear that Just Fine has been training things. The max range EX command grab that I was getting hit by several times in there was a little disorienting for me simply because, wait, that's that long? And she hasn't tended to do that precisely to me very often, at least not lately. So it does seem like she is gaining ground. But overall, it's all calm in the end, and all the many, many, many things that go into that, really. I kind of like fighting games because they help me with that sort of thing, just by it being, well, one of the lessons that you never stop learning. So, I'm hoping that I can take a little time to reset here while she handles this Akuma, and possibly get another shot from a better position. I was also super impressed with that medium wingless. Medium? Probably medium? I don't know, whichever wingless that was that got me in the neutral jump. But yeah, that's technically the same lesson. I didn't need to be neutral jump from that range. There's nothing Mika could do from that range that would bother me if I just stood there instead of neutral jumping. And, well, as you saw, there are certainly things that would bother me if I do neutral jump. But it's in part a stress reaction of its own, so kudos to her for showing me that it's not safe and forcing me to work on the actual, well, staying calm. It's a lot of little practice, really. Rillian's reminder was helpful as well. Just in that noticing every time, no, hold on, I got a little more agitated or a little more off balance. Let me calm myself down. And I never got all the way there, but I got to reset the counter a few times, or at least bring it back down a level or two so that I didn't get completely disoriented so quickly. Learning how to do that for yourself, something I'm definitely still working on, is really helpful. And some days I'm a lot better at it, some days I'm not remotely as good at it, and today's seems to be a little more on the low edge, but, you know, all the better practice with really.
Round two. Fight!
Vega wins. It's go time.
One of the less obvious but stronger benefits you can gain as a player from realizing this sort of situation is actually understanding how to watch higher level matches. When you are first starting out, as much as it would seem like, hey, the best idea would be to learn how to play my character by going to watch people who play my character really well. No, because they have different abilities, different mindsets, different goals, and so do their opponents. It's one of the first things you have to learn in this game, that high-level people are not thinking about the same things at all. They don't have the same risk assessment at all. They're not thinking that they can jump on their opponent basically 50% of the time, and therefore 50% of the game they play isn't about can you anti-air. But in order to understand why any given thing is working or not working, you have to know a lot of little things about mindsets. Why did your opponent jump? Why did that high level player choose to jump at that moment? And why did the jump work on this person that has presumably been practicing this game forever? Are jumps good? No, it's that somehow some set of sequence things leading up to that jump made it less possible or less likely for the other player to respond by actually anti-airing. We did talk about this a lot on commentary, though we don't get the same type of commentary anymore in a lot of places. Unfortunately, the pandemic has limited where our commentators can get their work done and how they can be connected to the tournaments we are seeing. So online tournaments have a bit of a different feeling lately because of it. But there's still definitely older tournaments you could still watch. There's definitely some really long stream archives, especially you can find big tournament stuff on YouTube. And you can watch high level play there, or you can watch it on CFN itself, obviously. If you're watching on CFN, you have no one to help you, but you do have the ability to use the systems the game has built in place for looking at frame data, looking at frame by frame playback to figure out what's happened, and if neither of those things is enough, there's always HiFight, which can be found on Twitter at HiFightTH, who will do the sort of breakdowns you need to understand not only what is happening, but sometimes why it is happening, or at least the very basics of, hey, fighting games work like this. This is why someone did this thing, or why they might care. That moment, for example, why sweep? Why slide right then? There's a whole specific set of things that goes into deciding to slide, or deciding to go for that charge dropkick right there. And if you are just getting used to the game, you probably don't know what those things are yet.
Final round.
Why did that throw work? Presumably because of things that happened not even in this round, like a fight ago, is still in mind, and that's why they're happening. Some opponents can't be conditioned, and you have to get used to those types as well. But both these players can be, and it causes their matches to evolve slowly as they go. Especially when they basically have to start from a certain middle point repeatedly of, okay, I remember that this thing is necessary, therefore I'm going to do this. And they climb back up the ladder of strategies that they use against each other. Even that moment was basically the same thing. Oh, okay, well, my opponent knows that when I have meter, I uppercut after that. My opponent knows I won't have meter, so my opponent will probably try to get me because I can't uppercut. The thing they will most likely try to get me with is the throw that I'm usually uppercutting to avoid, and therefore I should backdash to avoid the throw that they were going to do because I didn't have any meter. And you could of course go to the next level of someone thinking, okay, well you normally do this, therefore my response to you doing your EX Mujin Kyaku, which is basically -2, is to do charge drop kick. If you're not too familiar with how this game works, that is not in any way reasonable to you. There's no way that makes you go, okay, so I'm supposed to do charge drop kick after that? It worked, clearly it does something. And given enough time you could work out, yes, it beats the backdash. And then think, oh well, probably that's because the opponent was expecting the backdash. But you just don't necessarily have the reason of knowing why they were expecting the backdash in that moment, or how far you could push it. It leads to moments like that, where they both basically decide to sweep at the same time on practically the same frame and trade on the sweep.
Round 2. Fight.
And this absolutely happens in high level matches too. There's entire compilations of, some are somewhat staged, but there are a couple where people just do moves that trade with each other for basically 5 to 6 interactions. I think the only good one online visually that you can find was specifically staged for the intention of looking a certain way, but if you watch Itazan, you'll probably find something, because Itazan is a gutsy person and it comes up a lot more often. When you're more familiar with your opponent's options, you're also more likely to do things like forward jump out. And that's why we often try to get the bots to teach you to just do that. Not necessarily because it works every time, but just to remind you, to get you so comfortable with the idea that, oh, I can forward jump out of at least some of this character's situations and pressure, that you have it in the back of your mind for when things are being really stressful. Because it can help you get to a different point altogether. Okay, I can't forward jump. Why can't I forward jump? And that might lead you to recognizing, oh, well, my opponent is using the same string every time. They're going for full pressure every time. I can't forward jump because they aren't using their other options to stop me from doing other things. They just are using either basic pressure, or in the case of high level players, sometimes they are specifically stopping the forward jump because they know it's the least risky option for the player to take. Once you have learned the least risky option, obviously you spend your time using that one more often, unless you think taking the risk is going to get you something. Therefore, if the least risky thing against, say, Abigail is to forward jump out of the corner pressure, then you will tend toward this even if you know that the opposing Abigail has a counter to it, because the counter doesn't do as much damage as standing there and letting Abigail wreck your face.
Fight.
Meaning that at higher levels, you may get beat much more often for using the right option. It's almost a way of helping out higher level players when you face them, in helping out in the sense of them being able to win more. If you have a way out of layered pressure that doesn't get you out of basic pressure, then they generally will default to just using basic pressure, because they can't tell that you're trying to use the other option. They think you're just hitting random buttons and getting hit. A lot of the time, it's easy to come to that conclusion. Until you flatly demonstrate, no, I know how to beat this thing you're doing. I was trying to do the other thing in case you did that. That comes up really often between these two, especially since the only real way for this to push forward here is for Justine to start whiff punishing Mayokin, but it's not easy to do because Mika as a character doesn't have a lot of options for this. She has options, but most of them involve a very, very tight reaction. She can do it with crouch medium kick though, so that's probably the best way to go on that regard. But of course, knowing that that could be coming, if you had to focus too much on physically doing it or even mentally getting yourself to do it, you're not going to be ready when Karine switches to doing something else altogether. Because she doesn't have to Mayokin. Technically, she doesn't even want to Mayokin. She wants to have options other than Mayokin.
You win.
But something else you are doing is preventing her from having those options. If you stop doing the thing because I keep getting hit by Mayokin and I want to whiff punish it or stop it, then she no longer has a reason to Mayokin in the first place, and you find yourself doubly frustrated because you are preparing for something that's no longer happening. This is why it's important. This is why counting, the equivalent of counting, is important. To be able to play the match normally while still counting and focusing on the thing you need to count. It's super important to learn to think of a person not necessarily as a bot, but specific tools they have as very similar to the feeling bots should probably be giving you. Our bots are randomized for that reason. Understanding that your opponent will eventually do X does not prepare you for it if Y and Z have the potential to take off your health before you can get them to do X. If you don't count, you don't try to get yourself into optimal situations. You just go, okay, every time they actually did the move, I did the correct thing. Which is not the way to make gains. Or rather, it's a very limited amount of gains you can make by doing it. So it doesn't make sense, for example, for Justine to prepare for Mayokins. She'll get jumped on, she'll get tenkoed, she'll get hit by even dash up stuff. Oh. That's usually the sign that the internet is going into its terrible mode. And that probably means that Justine's going to take a break in case it somehow resolves itself. And probably Kazuki Dynasty will head out and look for another lounge for now. Oh wait, maybe not. Omni Rabbit has arrived, and while Justine's net has clearly decided to tank, as you can literally see, maybe it'll recover itself over the time it takes for them to have their match. We're already fairly far into our stream, and this is usually the point where matches slow down a little bit. You can just recreate your lounges, it will make you show up earlier in the time of creation, but today we're actually going to just have people come in, especially with this timing, and rotate around so that we can get a little, for example, Nakali versus Laura and so on. Omni Rabbit does tend to join our streams toward the end, as you would know if you've watched them recently. And that usually is our signal that even a mix and mash will probably shift to be more like mishmashing. That said, this lounge I think would have 2 slots total left, and 1 would change if the wolf ends up on this side. I'd have a lot more to say here, but this match is quite heavily more the same. The only difference is that because they two know each other, it's less likely they'll use their forward moving attacks enough for the neutral jump to come up. Or rather, that's usually something they adapt into as their stress starts to increase, because the neutral jump is a stress relieving action. If you are at the right range, your opponent can basically not hurt you unless they were super primed for it, so you can use it to get out of tough footsie situations without introducing a whole lot of risk to yourself. There's also other situations where you feel as if, yeah, this whole playing out the way it is going to make my opponent want to come in at me, and my situation or position is bad, so let me just neutral jump now. It's a different feeling at that point, because you're not really trying to either reset stress or deal with something that they do in neutral. But as you can see, it will come up more and more as the players increase their own stress, let's say, by getting more used to each other. Neutral jumping is a very important part of footsies, a completely unrealistic one relative to fighting games, but it's similar to a sidestep in DOA, which we've been talking about a lot. Just not used quite as liberally, because while just sidesteps can also be punished fairly heavily, they're also much harder to recognize they're happening.
You lose. Round one. Fight!
Other things that slowly shift as these two fight, for example, is the amount of light kicks that get used. The light kick being another good way to resolve certain problems, and just enough to cause the opponent to have to twitch more. Because all they really want is to play a ton of footsies and see who can think up a more interesting way to get the other to do the wrong thing in a crucial moment. We often joke that we'd be fairly good at exhibition matches for characters, because you don't have to be necessarily all that good to do exhibition matches, you just have to understand a lot of things and want to do a lot of things. You might not be showing off the highest level of play of the character, but probably the many methods of play of the character. As Omni Rabbit's patience increases, Rune Siren's creativity in terms of her need to hit things to cause situations also increases, but as your opponent becomes more and more defensive, you get a lot more use out of your things like, in Karin's case, her stand medium punch. Long-ish medium buttons that could mess with your opponent's range by hitting from max range, or they're not sure if you're in range yet, but they don't want to get hit by it, so they do something, and you technically hit them with something else. It's a good way to cause opponents to go back on the offensive if you felt as if that was a better situation for you. If nothing else, it creates a good pushback, so anyone who is under enough stress, and therefore is a little, like, buttonsy at that moment, you can use it to get them to hit buttons and get the advantage yourself, as we had before.
You lose.
No, Low Siren has sort of recovered. We saw this match interestingly last week Wednesday, but not for the reason you'd expect. So let's see if it's as fun now as it was then.
Let's do this.
Boom! That's how you start the fight and finish it quickly. Come on, Oh,
Round 1. Fight!
Ding ding! I took this round.
Round 2. Fight!
Let's see what you've got.
Lara wins.
Round 1. Fight!
It doesn't look quite as much. Maybe they like a darker stage. Last time, therefore, you got commentary from the Buffalo FGC commentary team. I only have a little to give now myself, which is why I didn't give any in match 1. I need to see if they were in approximately the same state as they were last week Wednesday. Kind of. It's enough that there's still relatively similar things to comment on, but not so much so that the part I had the most to talk about during that is showing up a whole lot. Specifically, maybe Just Fine has made an adaptation based on something that did or did not work last time, but there's a lot less wiggly footsies. The wiggly footsies though only really helps if Onrabbit is not willing to just hit forward heavy punch in neutral. And this is one of Lara's strongest tools, despite it being very punishable, because it's super hard to, relatively speaking, whiff punish. The way the move recovers means that whiff punishing it properly is difficult for many characters. And if you spend too much time expecting it, you just open yourself up to Lara doing all of her other stuff. So it's a good shenanigan to have. It's very similar to a jump, really, for her.
Final round.
Lara doesn't want to just jump because she has so many little things that can go wrong when she jumps, and has a lot more, this is specific to me, I'm gonna get beat out this way. She as a character also doesn't benefit from as much from getting to a position where she has jumped, hit with a perfect spaced move, and then has pressure from there, because her pushback doesn't necessarily lead to as many things. But she does really benefit from throwing out that forward heavy punch in many of the same spacings and timings that she might want to jump. Bison has a similar capacity. This is because Laura's goal isn't usually to dodge a move someone else is doing. She's either too far out and not caring, or she expects whatever she's doing to check their opponent, and if they happen to be blocking, then great. This is something important when you're changing your mindset. If you were willing to jump and get anti-aired in order to get damage, then why wouldn't you be willing to do other move that has functionally the same effect? Bison, for example, if he gets crush counter on his down forward heavy punch, that is a lot of damage. If you even have the slightest capacity for that confirm, and it's not a terribly difficult confirm, that is a lot of damage, a lot of corner carry, and the move in Bison's case isn't even minus, so you don't care at all. You care if your opponent makes you whiff it, or jumps over, or something. You can take a lot of damage for doing it, but it's not terribly more than, well, I was willing to jump. And in some cases, for some characters, if you were willing to dash and go for a button, and get counter hit on the light punch or something, you could also just basically get deleted depending on their health. Gil, for example, will check your dash into 50% damage. That's where that perfect defensive spacing comes in. Laura's sweep can be used in a similar way. While it is extremely punishable, the amount of people who actually are ready for Laura's sweep that end up punishing Laura's sweep, when used correctly, as far as I've seen, is really low. It's similar to Karine, but Karine is actually more punishable. People can condition themselves to deal with Karine's sweep. Laura's sweep, because of the type of character Laura is, you're not generally looking for Laura's sweep. And even if you are, you're probably not going to do anything about it. Certainly not enough so that Laura cares to go, well, I'm not hitting that anymore. Fortunately for Mika, she can outright outrange the move and then whiff punish it. And it is fairly whiff punishable if you're that sort of player. On top of all of that, Omni Rabbit gets at least one free activation. Which, while you can absolutely turn it into a bad thing and end up, oh well, I've taken control of it now, I have pressure, you shouldn't have done that, isn't necessarily enough to discourage, because Laura always has all of her options available after that cancel. The better you get at the cancel, the more options you have.
It's go time.
But since the wolf is probably stopping soon, we're gonna allow that one last match to go through, probably? Yeah, let's go. It's a little matter of attentiveness here. This matchup is harder for the wolf in particular because Omni Rabbit is relatively difficult to read and is very good at reading other people. Necalli is, unfortunately, often either too straightforward or too easily stressed. The optimal situation, therefore, is really difficult because it's a matter of managing to find a spacing to backdash where Laura won't instantly chase you. Why? Because backdash is the easiest way for Necalli to get options related to his heavy kick, stomp, and V skill. Doesn't matter which V skill. Either V skill you're using is fine. V skill 2 is actually better for this, which is why DeWolf needs to learn it. If you skill 1, you have to be able to tell or guess where Lara is going to try to move to when you backdash and try to target it, or if she's not going to move at all. Therefore, you have to convince her to not to move. With V-Skill 2, you just have to get enough space to actually use the backdash to set up the V-Skill, and then you're basically set. She has to jump over it in most situations, and you therefore only cared about whether or not you had enough time to do it as a whole. Similarly, you can respond to Lara backdashing by just, again, using the V-Skill. The important thing here being, walking Lara to the corner using these methods is probably your strongest option. Because anything else you do is just going to end up with you being stressed in neutral, because you'll end up feeling like, okay, there's nothing I can actually do here. Once you have managed to walk Lara to the corner, Necalli's options open up drastically. Not necessarily because of pressure, but because Necalli's ability to corner guard Lara is actually really good. Any character whose stand medium kick leads into a good full combo at close range is super good at corner guard versus Lara, especially if the move is fast. Generally, you don't check Lara's attacks with anything too slow, let's say. You generally want to go for hitting your light kick or your light punch and hope that things don't go terrible. But if you have a 5-frame stand kick, you definitely have a lot of good options for making sure Lara really regrets when she does mess up something. And because of that jump art issue we mentioned before, a lot of Necalli's animations result in Lara not really getting her combos or needing to pay a lot more attention when she lands a jump. If you think Lara's going to land a jump on you, the general mindset of a Lara player means you should take the hit because, well, you know you're not going to dodge it, but then hold up forward or something, or backdash. Because ambiguous jumps that land for Lara are not really heavy opportunities for much. She has combos that work, but they are both stressfully difficult to actually execute, and can get beaten in all sorts of weird ways due to pushback and character interactions. When you don't have the good options, when you don't know if you can get it, or if you think your opponent has definitely done something that might be minus but they managed to get some setup, or you think you were slow, the fact that Lara is almost always hoping to get away with it means she's more throwable. At higher levels, this doesn't really mean much. Your opponent will block and then delay the throw, tech, and still get out of the situation. But there's still something to be done there. Particularly true because Necalli just has an invincible uppercut to do weird things with. Good reach on stand medium punch also helps. And the fact that the pushback on stand medium punch basically means that Necalli gets to hit whatever he wants after. Lara's not a character with terribly tricky hurt boxes or similar, unlike Zeku where you'd have to care a lot about hitting that stand medium punch. In those situations, against Lara, Necalli can mostly just hit it. But this strategy is hard to enact because, again, you have to backdash, and you have to know when the timing to backdash is that Lara isn't totally confident that she's going to deal with whatever you can do. In this case, it makes Cosmic Wolf's style a little stronger for this purpose because of the willingness to just dash up command grab and mastery of that spacing. When you have at least some of that, it's a little bit easier to make Lara worry more in neutral and not be as willing to do certain things, meaning that you get to backdash more often. But your best opportunity for backdashing comes when you realize, I have perfectly spaced something so that I can't be reached by any Lara moves. I didn't get any damage, but my spacing was on point, Therefore Lara shouldn't be trying to do much to me, and therefore I can move.
Here we go!
This is fortunately a thing that Necalli absolutely can train against Lara Bot, to the point where it's functionally a kata. And it will come up for other characters. Specifically, it is the Necalli's slight variation of what the kata actually is. Our kata 33, I believe it is, has to do with specifically backdashing, looking for those moments against an opponent who you know will in fact retreat, will chase down your retreat, and recognizing what to do when they do this, and the spacings at which you've gotten away with it.
Let's do this.
Unfortunately, our Lara Bot doesn't tend to block quite enough for you to find yourself in the situation where you have been blocked and backdashed it, but you can still learn the situations if you apply enough mindfulness to it. Just thinking about, had this been blocked, I would be in the correct spacing. Or just learning the maximum spacings you can do moves from against an opponent with a tendency to advance, to check their advance or whiff correctly. Lara and Mika bots are directly built for this, Mika bot being much harder to input and therefore not usually our recommendation. She's super useful in terms of really pushing you to the next level, but practice with Lara until, as the BDO players say, you've got thumbs and can actually input Mika bot in the first place. She's the only one we've got that definitely nearly none of the button configs you could do help enough. That whole hitting a heavy punch, light punch thing. Generally the better option is to set 2 buttons to... Never mind, I'm not going to that now. You'll figure it out if you for some reason choose to put yourself through that. Of course, you can absolutely use our modified, acceptable, or less advanced Mika bot for the purpose. It's just that advanced kata level training doesn't often come up against that version of Mika bot. You can absolutely learn Mika things from it. The kata requires a really good version with all of the trimmings, let's say. That said, if you play a character who, for some reason, Mika is more likely to use her parry against, we may have a variation going up soon that might be easier to deal with, since a lot of the way that Mika bot is built now is related to dealing with her V skill, getting enough armored setups, understanding how that affects her V meter and her V skill leading into V trigger stuff that you have to care about. Because yes, it's 2020, she's not the most popular character, but you absolutely still have to care about it. Because you will still see Mikas in tournaments and they will catch you off guard and do massive damage and possibly send you to losers or out, simply because she is not necessarily a super explosive character anymore, but as we've often said, Mika's footsies are a little too good to be ignored as a grappler. The standard grappler does not have the level of footsies Mika is capable of in most games, honestly. Because it means she can spend entire rounds, win entire rounds without ever landing a single command grab. Or she can put so much pressure on you in the footsies that you will become more susceptible to command grabs. Both really offsetting. On top of all the really crazy stuff she does and can do, because she doesn't need her V meter for much. She also builds it up easier than other characters in either mode, principally because she gets a lot more crush counters than other characters. Slide often crush counters in situations one might not be thinking about. And her pressure options on your wake up are also at least high chance of being crush counters. She doesn't always get great conversions from these crush counters, depending on your spacing or, you know, just the amount of thought going on in the match. But she absolutely can use the meter she builds up as her reward for that resource. Not to mention the fact that if you didn't know, the recovery on Lady Mika, her forward heavy punch, is actually really good, to the point where it's actually annoying.
Lara wins.
If you prime yourself too much, you tend to get hit by the move simply because it has a massive number of active frames and you might do a light punch or something straight into it. Also, the start of it is very slightly looks like her dash, making it worse. And when it does recover,
Round one.
eh.
Fight.
The stream is most likely not going for too much longer. This is probably the second last match of the night. The lounge is probably actually going to stay open. Probably, let's say at 9:30 Eastern. So if you were at this point and contemplating, should I join, is it about to end? You should probably join because you will get your matches. More so between basically now and 9:30, so given that we're rotating around and the lounge has 4 people in it, I'd say you'd probably get to start playing around 9 or a little bit after. And if you're likely to be on a win streak, it'll flow around. I don't expect too many of the current lounge members to be heading out, probably Duo. But the current trio might be playing for a while. So you would probably have to wait through that, but you would get a decent distribution of player mindsets, characters, and styles. Also minor chance of Abigail.
It's go time. Let's do this.
That's how you start the fight.
So yes, we're gonna treat this as our last on-stream match.
Round one.
You shouldn't be expecting anything fabulous though. Going all out is kind of the opposite of what we probably want to do here. Especially since, as noted, we are probably going for at least another half an hour. Timings have been a little tricky relative to Tuesday content. We've generally been having it, not necessarily much talking during it. Which is a shame because our human player is still working through stuff, but despite all that, timing is unlikely to lead to there being a stream involving talking for Guilty Gear tomorrow. It is, however, likely to be Guilty Gear if you have any interest. I feel as if we're not going to get back to Claire for a while the wolf picks up related skills in Guilty Gear.
Round 2. Fight.
And it's getting cooler and darker, meaning that our players are more likely to spend more time training in fighting games. It's a little hard to explain why that happens in that way, but it's also related to the fact that we normally have like a relatively long break after Combo Breaker and ramp up training, or at least have always intended to go to East Coast Throwdown and therefore got into the rhythm of ramping up training around October, regardless of whether or not we were actually able to go. We did in fact get to go last year, it went okay. One of those analysts becoming unavailable at the crucial moment problems though. Which reminds me that I owe Omni Rabbit some more Colleen matches. All bots and katas mentioned thus far can be found at our website 2-mk.org. They're under their various categories. If you're used to it, you can just type in the bot's name with the dash bot at the end. But as they expand into having more versions, you might have to put on a number. While we call them things like Dalsimbot 2.0, you can just type in Dalsim-bot 2 when that time comes. Wednesday's content, due to the whole increase in practice, might in fact be more Street Fighter.
Round 1. Fight.
Although it's less likely to be sandbag casuals and straight up Heart of Battle. Since we're reasonably certain most people know what they need to work on now. Or it comes up enough in other regular play that it doesn't require a dedicated moment. Sandbag casuals are more so for when people feel lost about what would be the next best thing to focus their work on. And with the expansion of people playing the game due to the game being free on PS Plus for a couple more days actually, I think. The game system, for those who don't know, you will get the Champion Edition style upgrade, but not all of the content and free characters. However, as far as I know, they have not removed the option to buy basically any expansion DLC character with fight money still. And I believe you still get fight money in the standard way for doing everything in the game, meaning that you can absolutely still use your fight money to just buy whichever character you thought was cool without any upgrade to CP itself. My own copy has been left in this status so I can make sure that whenever I need to tell anyone those sorts of things. And so far I've had no problems, although I haven't bought any characters recently. We don't know for sure whether or not Dan will just be available because of it. We don't know when Dan will be available in the first place. Although I kind of have Danbot ready. Understanding how to build bots has a lot more to do with their frame data, and presumably one or two tricks that might be used than anything else. Therefore, you can expect Danbot to be available pretty quickly after the character is. And maybe it'll take a little longer on testing if you in fact have to pay fight money to pick him up. But we still have some good setups to get a lot of testing done, so look out for that. On Thursday we'll be having our Dead or Alive 60 times lounge stream, and on Friday hopefully Dalsimbot 2 will be ready. But that brings us probably to the end of our stream for the night. Looks like the Wolf might get one more match, maybe, but we are not sticking around on stream for it. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.
Let's do this.